Hey everybody, welcome back. It's a brand new year of shows. I think it's the first one I'm doing this year. And tonight we're going to be talking about the band Genesis. And we're going to be talking about our 5 favorite albums from Genesis. So I've been listening to Genesis, going back and listening to a lot of stuff this last month. I'm all loaded up on Genesis. Honestly, I don't need to hear Genesis now for a few weeks because I've been listening to nothing but Genesis for the last month and putting this list together. But anyway, who better to rank these records with than my 2 partners in crime? You got Mr. Pete Pardo and Mr. Martin Popoff. How are you gentlemen doing?
Doing great. Yeah, we've got that big storm going here in Toronto.
Dude, I was just saying to Pete, I think I got like 7-8 inches outside right now.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man. Like, well, I mean, you know, we had one, if you remember early on, Martin, I think like November, we had one real snowstorm.
Yeah.
And then that was it. And we
mild.
really had nothing since.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we got off this lucky for this long, so we can't really complain. So, you know, I wanted to say a couple of things, just to disclose a couple of things. You know, I am not a prog rock fan, right? But yet, I love these records. And one wonderful thing about doing these shows is it gets me listening to stuff that I normally probably wouldn't really listen to. Because for me, Genesis kind of started at Duke and then onward. That's what I knew of Genesis, right? I mean, you know, I'd heard The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway on the radio and the odd things here and there, but I really hadn't done a super deep dive into Genesis until now. And it's funny I say I'm not a fan of prog rock. Meanwhile, like Rush is one of my favorite bands, right? But I don't know, somehow Rush is proggy, but
we're not going to do King Crimson next month.
No, we're not going to. No King Crimson. You know what? It's funny because somebody was trying to get me into Yes, and I tried. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do Yes. It's weird, like how some bands I can get into, and other bands it's like, you know, it just it doesn't work, right? This was a Topographic Oceans, I think, was the album I tried to get into, and it's like I just can't do it. But
wrong one to start with. Wrong one to start with.
Is that so? Okay? What would you suggest then?
Either Fragile or Close to the Edge, I think, would be the best place to start.
Going for the one. I like going for the
one.
Drama's very immediate, right?
Drama's good.
Drama.
The Yes album is really good too.
All right, I'll give that another go, because the thing is, like, you know, what I love about this, and when I hear prog that I like, I mean, for me, it's all about, you know, I mean, I play guitar and I write music, so it's just I love the, you know, all the possibilities and the places these guys take stuff to, because the creativity is absolutely off the charts, you know, compared to 90% of what you hear, right? So I always come away with a huge appreciation for the creativeness and the orchestration and the arrangements and all that. Like, I'm just blown away. I mean, these guys will put more in a song than most bands put in their entire career, you know, like it's amazing, right? You know, but yeah, so I you know, when I find something I can latch onto, I actually quite enjoy it. I enjoy it quite a bit. So, but anyway, so you know, first question I always ask, you know, I mean, I mentioned my first exposure to Genesis, listening to Turn It On the radio, which is still one of my top 5 Genesis songs. Love that song, Turn It On Again. Pete, what was your first exposure to Genesis?
I bought the live album Seconds Out in 1978. It had already been out for like a year, and I was in my local record store, and this was just staring me in the face as I was going through the letter G, right? And I was like, I had no idea who Genesis was, but as I told Martin many times, boy, when I was younger, you threw like a live shot on an album cover and I was buying it. I just instantly drawn to shots of bands on stage. So I took it home. I was like, this looks awesome. Guy's got a double neck guitar, looks like, over there. I'm like, why not, right? And I brought it home, and this was unlike any, because I was a Kiss fan at the time, right? I wasn't listening to
Yeah.
anything like this. So, but I really liked it, and little did I know, because I had no idea at the time, that this was like Phil Collins, newly in the lead vocalist slot,
Right.
singing lots of songs that Peter Gabriel kind of made famous. I had no idea that Peter Gabriel was ever even in the band. I had no idea. And then, and then there were three came out, and I bought that. And then Duke came out, and I love Duke like you. I
Yeah.
really got it. And then I started going backwards. And then I remember getting like the early albums and hearing like Peter Gabriel singing these songs. And I'm like, well, he sounds a little like Phil, but a little different. And the songs were a little different back then. But and that kind of started my love affair with the early part of the catalog. And they kind of lost me with stuff that came out later on. So yeah, but that was how I started. It was with this album. And so right off the bat, I'm listening to Supper's Ready and Cinema Show and Squonk and Los Endos and Dance on a Volcano, all these great songs. But with Phil singing, so I got used to him with these songs.
So when you were listening to the Peter stuff, did you like it better? Did you prefer Phil in that lead spot, singing spot?
It took me a couple of years, but then the charm of the Peter Gabriel stuff just kind of won me over. But I really respect Phil's vocals a lot, and there are some times that like I will listen to the old versions of these songs with Peter on vocals, and then I'll hear the Seconds Out stuff, and I'll be like, that's kind of what I heard first. And so like there are a few like like Afterglow, well, not Afterglow, but like parts of Supper's Ready. I kind of like some of the verses that Phil sang on here versus the original album. Yeah, there's little bits and pieces that I still am very fond of the Phil Collins versions, but for the most part, I hold the Gabriel era in really, really high regard. There's just something, I think I even think Phil's a better singer, but I think there was a theatricality and a very British charm about Peter Gabriel that I think is kind of hard to beat. So, and the music back then was a little bit different too. So even like Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering is a little bit different than the albums that came before. They're all great, but there's differences, subtle differences there.
Yeah. What about yourself, Martin?
Man, this is a complicated one. I mean, it's like those records were just around in other people's collections for a long time. I don't recall ever getting a Genesis album as a new release until my only memory really is of this one. So by the time I got this as a new release, somehow all the Genesis albums before had slowly crept into my record collection at like $2 and $3, right? But I remember I was in third year university in Victoria. I definitely got this as a new release and played it a lot, right? So, but I had everything else, but I swear they must have all come to me used. I don't remember any big excitement over an album after this one, buying it as a new release either. These records have just always been in my collection, and they always got there mostly cheap and used, right? And they were just always there. And that's going to be a theme throughout my ranking is how this band's just always around, yet there's so many of the albums I just don't know really implicitly. And it's been this mystery in my life why these songs have never soaked all the way in, except for my more or less top few.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, the earlier stuff that it's a lot to digest. I mean, you can't just give them a single listen. I mean, like I said, I've been listening to this stuff for the last, I don't know, month and a half, and because you always, every time you pick up something new, you notice something new that wasn't there before. Because they're so dense, there's so much going on, and it's just, you can't just soak it all in one shot. Multiple listens for sure. All right, so we're gonna go around. We're ranking our top 5 albums from Genesis, and we'll go Pete, and then we'll go Martin, surrounded by sweaters.
Okay.
All right.
All right, so of course, as I'm sure everybody knows, and folks who are watching who follow Sea of Tranquility, I ranked the Genesis catalog a few years ago, 2-3 years ago. And a lot of times before I come on here and to rank catalogs on stuff that I've done on my channel, I sometimes like to go back and watch the old episode and see what I was thinking, how I ranked them back then and how it coincides with how I'm feeling today. And I decided not to do that this time. I said, all right, I'm just going to kind of go in fresh. And I think
don't worry, I watched it for you. I watched the whole thing.
Oh, you did? Okay, thanks, Martin. So, Martin, you'll have to let me know how I've done here and if it's the same. The first three were kind of no-brainers for me. I didn't have to go re-listen to anything. I mean, I know these albums so well anyway. But number 4 and 5 was kind of difficult. And I'm like, gee, I wonder how I ranked 4 and 5 back then. And I'm like, you know what? Doesn't matter. I'm going to go with kind of how I've been grooving to these albums over the last couple of years. And this, I have a feeling this was higher back then, but number 5 for me today, I'm going to go with The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway.
Okay.
Which is, their big double album, concept album. It's fantastic. I love it. It's not an everyday Genesis listen for me. I like when I'm really in the mood for Genesis, I don't often go to this one. But I love it, obviously. But I have to be in the mood to listen to this one start to finish and like spend time. You got to spend time with this album.
Yes.
It's kind of like Topographic Oceans by Yes, right? You don't just say, I'm going to put Topographic Oceans on today. You got to be in the mood to listen to Topographic Oceans.
Right.
That's not an everyday listen for me either. But there's spectacular stuff on here. And I would have loved to have seen this played live back in the day when they toured for it. The tour was a disaster, but it was the last tour for Gabriel with the band. But there's some great songs on here. Flying a Windshield, The Lamia, Colony of Slippermen, In the Cage. I mean, really dramatic stuff. Might contain some of Hackett's best guitar work on a Genesis album. Great vocals. It's adventurous. It's dramatic. Some people think it's kind of a little too long or too much filler. Whatever. I don't buy into that. It's a really good double album, and that's my number 5. Again, I think I might have ranked it a little bit higher, but I kind of went with the ones that I've listened to more in recent years. So that's number 5.
Cool. Yeah, more on that one later. Yourself, Martin, number 5.
Well, like I say, I watched Pete's show, and I actually watched 3 other ranking shows, and I was amazed at how mixed up the lists were and how, people were into these different eras. And I'm kind of that way too, but I'm not going to be completely contrarian on this. But it's going to look pretty contrarian. So I'm going to start with, and then there were 3. I can just listen to this album for the beauty of the production, just the spaciousness of the drums, even though they sound really analog on this, and the big synth sounds. It's kind of like a pomp rock album. It's kind of Styxy. It's got like synth bass and I guess mixed in with regular bass, but the synths are really prevalent throughout the whole thing. It's just gorgeously recorded. I love the heavier stuff on it. Down and Out definitely to begin with. But even the ballads, Undertow's cool. It's got some really nice epic sort of chord changes in it. To me, the funny thing about this catalog is that it really changes completely logically and gradually as you move throughout all those years, right? Every album pretty much. Lamb is a weird little outlier, I think. But every album just seems to fit snugly between the one before it and the one after, and this one is kind of like that as well. You start getting some of the pop stuff in here, but Burning Rope, like very expansive, big piano on it. Even Ballad of Big, which is kind of funny. It's like a story of 2 songs. I don't like the whole beginning thing, but then it slows down and does this really kind of big pomp, again, very pomp rock, poppy, but not. It's almost like poppy, but grand. It's not particularly maudlin. Of course, we know, it's called this because they're down to the 3. They've lost Peter and Steve by this point, but I think it's beautifully recorded. And just lots of good stuff on it. Just on the edge of being too poppy, but also just so analogly recorded, but gorgeously recorded, and still lots and lots of prog in it. So that's my number 5.
Cool. Well, my number 5 is, and then there were 3.
All right.
For a lot of the reasons that you mentioned. I mean, the songs were starting to get shorter. In a way, you can draw kind of a parallel between them and Rush, because they started doing the shorter songs and started doing kind of a little more poppy stuff, but more, but a little more economical songs. But yeah, it's shorter songs, but still quite poppy. Down and Out is just a great opener. I love the chords. There's like this angst in those chords that just, oh man, it's just, I love the chord progressions. Those are just big heavy chords sound amazing on this. It's got some, it's already starting with some of the Phil Collins kind of ballady tendencies. But some of the songs are still quite good, like Undertow. Many Too Many is great, but I mean, I Snowbound and Say It's All Right, Joe, already for me, they kind of just, they're a little bit past the edge where it's just getting a little too, I don't know, cheesy. Is that the right word? Um, it is a little sappy at times, but there's enough good tunes on this to rank obviously my top five. Many Too Many is great. Burning Rope, you mentioned. I love the single off of it, Follow You, Follow Me. I think it's a great song. But for me, the killer tune on this, it's just got this incredible riff on it, is Deep in the Mother Lode. That is just, oh God, that is just unreal. You know, I can't believe these guys were, I mean, that's heavy. They have some really good heavy moments in a lot of their records, and I'll be pointing those out as we go through. But yeah, good collection of songs, a little patchy at times, but overall, I mean, Deep in the Mother Lode alone is like, that's just absolutely killer for me. Love that song. Love it. Alrighty. What do you got for number 4, Pete?
Number 4, I'm going to go with Phil's first album as lead vocalist, Trick of the Tail, which I probably like more today than I did back then. I always liked it a lot, but this just, to me, it's almost perfect start to finish. I mean, man, Squonk is so good.
Oh.
Trick of the Tail, the title track, is so quirky and just very British sounding. We've got Robbery, Assault, and Battery. Entangled, Dance on a Volcano is tremendous. Los Endos is tremendous. Ripples is a very cool kind of poppy song. It's got some great yearning guitar work from Hackett on it. Mad Moon. I mean, the whole thing is just amazing. And it's what a great first album for someone to debut as the new lead singer, replacing a legend, right? I mean, it's just, they didn't miss a beat. They did not miss a beat at all. And this is like a really fun album to listen to. Like, the follow-up, Wind and Wuthering, is a little more serious. It's not really dark, but it's like more somber. Whereas this is like a very upbeat, kind of happy, bright album. And I love it. It's because, their earlier stuff is dense, like you said, and lots of layers. And I think this kind of strips back a little bit of the layers, but it's not quite as poppy as and then there were 3, but still amazing. And one thing I do want to mention, Phil Collins' drum work on this album is tremendous. He is an incredible drummer.
Yeah.
You can hear him blasting away more on those Brand X albums, right? If that's what you really want to hear. But man, on some of these Genesis albums, he's doing some incredible stuff. So yeah, Trick of the Tail, number 4.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, well, that space, they actually left a little bit of space in there for the stuff to sink in a little bit more, which I kind of dug on that record. Yeah. All right, Martin, what do you got for number 4?
All right, number 4, Trick of the Tail. Things are going to get different though soon, but anyways, not yet. I think the first side of this album is one of my favorite sides of Genesis, period. I mean, basically the first side delivers everything I want to love about the Peter Gabriel albums, but in this brighter format. I'm perfectly fine with Phil singing, but Dance on the Volcano is like just a good heavy prog tour de force, like some of the heavier things from earlier. Entangled is probably my favorite. Just those chords. It sounds like a really nice Yes song. I think it's the best of the straight, acoustic ballad type things. Squonk is amazing, and Squonk is so different. It's, quote unquote, they're Kashmir, right? I did a whole episode on songs inspired or like Kashmir, and this is kind of theirs that was actually inspired by Kashmir. And then Madman Moon is the same thing, where it serves like as a metaphor of the early dark Mellotron-y type stuff. So this whole side is just start to finish action packed. The second side lets me down a little bit. I think Robbery, Assault, and Battery and A Trick of the Tail are are a little almost too happy and upbeat and bouncy, but they're very British sounding still, which is kind of cool. And Ripples, great proggy ballad. And Los Endos, you know, I mean, I want a full on, you know, vocal song all the time, but this is kind of cool. It reminds me of King Crimson doing instrumentally sort of stuff. Later at the end of it, you get a little bit of Dance on the Volcano and Squonk. Would that be right, Pete? I think,
Yep.
yeah, just a little bit, and then into kind of a reprise of Squonk sort of thing, which is good. And the rest of it, I don't know what the rest of it is, but the kind of swirling tribal stuff that's in there as well. So, you know, I definitely find a lot of value in side 2, but I love side 2. David Henchel's production, amazing on this.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful, bright sounding album as well. I mean, it reminds me of And Then There Were Three in terms of the production. But yeah, there you go. Number 4.
Yeah, I like when they did that, when they took like a closing song and they revisited some themes from earlier in the album. They actually did that on Duke again with was it Duke's End, I think. They revisited some themes from a couple songs early in the album. So that's a kind of a little Genesis trademark.
Yep. Cool.
All right. Well, my number 4 is Foxtrot. 1972. This is the classic lineup of Genesis. The opener, man, Watcher of the Skies, absolutely killer. It's just killer. The drumming on that by Phil, Steve's guitar parts, that's an amazing song. Timetable, mellow but hooky, beautiful piece of music. Get 'em out on Friday. You know, a guitar driven song, right? Genesis, who knew, right? But there's a guitar driven song for a time anyway, and then the keyboards come in and take over. But you know, the bass I picked up a lot on the bass on this record too. The bass playing is fantastic. Now, I mean, I know he used bass pedals, but he's playing lines here, so I doubt very much those are pedals. But the bass on this is amazing. Can Utility and the Coastliners. Love the jam with the acoustics and the keys, proggy, but still very melodic. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, these guys are proggy, but there's so many hooks in what they're doing. You know, it's not just, you know, we're going to play a bunch of notes. I mean, it's very, very well done, very musical. Horizons, just a beautiful acoustic number from Mr. Hackett. And then you've got Supper's Ready. I mean, you know, just an epic. You know, I love Peter's vocals on this. It's so many moods, so many changes. You know, definitely takes you on a trip. As a whole, I love the album because it's proggy, but at the same time, it's very melodic and it is very interesting. You know, as long as it keeps your ear and keeps you hooked, you know, it's a winner. And yeah, and you know, I asked you about the comparison or what you preferred between Phil and Peter's vocals, and I kind of give a little bit of an edge to Peter's singing, only because he has this character in his voice that I really, really enjoy, you know. And not that Phil, I mean, he's got some character as well, but there's something about Peter's voice that just has I don't know, he almost sounds like a British actor, you know what I mean, when he's singing,
very
right?
theatrical. Yeah, it
Yeah.
absolutely is. Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I love the sound of that, you know, and it works so well within the context of the band. So but yeah, there you go. Number 4, Foxtrot.
And Michael Rutherford's, he generally, back in the day, he played a Rickenbacker bass, but I know he also, specifically for live shows, he had a Rickenbacker double neck, kind of like Geddy Lee. So you had the bass on the bottom, and up top it was a 12-string guitar. So
Yeah.
he used that live a lot. But he also, they used the Taurus bass pedals all the time early on.
Yeah. All righty, what do we got for number 3, Pete?
All right, so my number 3, kind of no-brainers for me. Number 3 is Foxtrot. So this is the third album, first album with Steve Hackett on board and Phil Collins, actually. And right? Yes. And early, raw, but really dramatic stuff on here, and some like early staples of the live repertoire comes from this album. I mean, it's got the musical box, which is absolutely amazing. You got the lovely For Absent Friends. Then you have the heavy kind of rocking and just bizarre Return of the Giant Hogweed. again, they were like experimenting with weird, like fantasy lyrics and all sorts of bizarre stuff. I think they, as songwriters, like from a lyrical perspective, I think they would get more quirky and more British as they were going forward. But there's some like wild stuff on here. Seven Stones is tremendous. Harold the Barrel is a really fun, quirky little rock song. You got the lovely Harlequin, and then the Fountain of Salmacis. I mean, if you want to know what it's like to use a mellotron to like the utmost ominous effect, just go listen to the Fountain of Salmacis. I mean, it's just amazing. You have that little bit of organ, the mellotron, the great Hackett guitar work. This is a tremendous album. Throughout my history of being a fan of Genesis, I often have to fight this from being my number one favorite album because I love it so much, but yet I always want to rank two higher, and I always do. But I always come back. Part of me always is like, one of these days, I'm just going to wake up and be like, nope, sorry, Nursery Crime is number one. Forget the other two. It's going to happen one of these days because I've been fighting it for years. But this is a really, really, really great album, in my opinion. But it's early on, right? They've developed much more after this. But so there's some songs on here for me that are just absolute Genesis classics. I mean, it's got the Musical Box, Hogweed, and Salmacis right there. Those three are just, to me, legendary. But great album. And cool Paul Whitehead album cover, too.
Yeah. Yeah. Alrighty. What's your number three?
Okay, so number three for me, I'm going with The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. I love the fact that it's a double album. I love the fact that it's a concept album. The concept is really weird. No one really likes the concept very much. Rael from New York City and all this. But,
Puerto Rican kid from New York City. Yeah.
You know what I love about it a lot is that it's a funny thing, but it's like, it feels like the coolest Genesis album in terms of like it's very critically acclaimed, but I love the fact that it's the jumping off point for Peter Gabriel, because I love the Peter Gabriel albums, most of them more than most Genesis albums. So this feels like almost like we're moving into Peter's solo career. I know this was like, he was big in the lyrics in this, right, as well. It was one of the touchy points about it, but it also has my favorite Genesis song of all time, which was basically the title track, the opening title track, right? With that stun bass sound in it, like just gorgeous, gorgeous chords, but that big gnarly bass. I love Flying a Windshield, Cuckoo Cocoon. Basically kind of the bigger hits on this, and then the rest of it, you do have to keep coming back to this. Yeah, this is definitely one of those, like a lot of the early ones, where I never feel like I really know it that well. Every time I come back to it, it just seems new, and it's probably one of the quirkier ones in terms of the deep tracks. It doesn't follow a lot of the same tropes of big, majestic, heavy, long things, or like absolute quietness. It's got some really kind of squirrely sort of arrangements in it. But yeah, I just love the whole journey you go on with it. The Carpet Crawlers, of course, another big hitsy song on it, I suppose. Right. So yeah, to put it into Scorpions terms, it's almost like the Taken by Force of the band, right? It's the end and the best of the early version, between whatever you want to call that middle version. I don't know how many more versions of Genesis there are after this, but there's at least two, I would say. Yeah. Probably four, in a sense. But again, it stands sort of aside, because I feel like most of those single albums, you can line up the tracks track for track across a lot of those albums, and they just kind of start blurring into one for me. So this one kind of draws my attention. It says, I'm a double, I'm a concept, I'm the last for Peter. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, my number three has been mentioned already, and I guess this would be phase two, because this is the first one without Peter. Okay. Trick of the Tail. Yeah, I mean, this thing is just, one thing I don't know. I noticed that, when you're listening to Phil singing, he almost sounds like Peter at times on this record. Maybe the inflections, the way he's delivering the lyrics, a lot of similar. I mean, he developed his own style later on, and he sounded like Phil Collins, but he sounded very Peter like I found on this one. But song wise, Dancing on a Volcano, killer opener. Heavy song, great changes. Love that keyboard riff. Those keyboard riffs are killer on this. Entangled has, I think, one of the most beautiful melodies out there. It's great acoustics. Great acoustic playing. The only thing with that song, I think it could have been about a minute shorter. I think it went a little bit too long, but still a fantastic song. Squonk. Squonk has got to be top 5. That thing is a friggin' masterpiece. The again, the big chords and that angst that I love. It's so heavy and just great. You know, Ripples. What a fantastic tune. Super melodic, beautiful. It's got that killer hooky chorus. Trick of the Tail. I love that one. It's very poppy, very, but still really cool. I mean, these guys do pop, but good pop, Um, the album, I mean, it's at times there's a couple of tracks I'm not that fond of, a little patchy at times, but the strong songs are super strong on this. I mean, the ones I mentioned are absolutely killer, and that's why it makes it to my number 3. But yeah, Trick of the Tail, just a great record. Did you find that when you're listening to that, you're listening to Phil, does he kind of sometimes remind you of Peter in the way he's singing those songs? Or is it just
for
me?
sure. Yeah, I found it just bizarre how close their voices turned out to be. I just love it. I think it's so cool.
Yeah.
I think Phil has a little sweeter tone than Peter does, but their inflection is very similar.
Yeah.
And there's a certain timbre that's almost identical. It's funny because like if you casually listen to the two of them side by side, you almost can't tell the difference. But the more you really listen, you can always tell when it's one versus the other. But it's very slight, subtle differences. That's why it works so well.
Yeah.
It was just so seamless for the band.
Yeah. All righty. What's your number 2, Pete?
All right. Selling England by the Pound.
Cool.
Great stuff here. I mean, does it get any better than leading off an album with Dancing with the Moonlit Night? I mean, just such a tremendous song. There's Mellotron all over the place. You got the quirky I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe, which I used to, it's funny you talk about like everybody has like songs that when you were a kid listening to them and you always sang the lyrics wrong. I used to always sing the lyrics wrong to I Know What I Like. I always be like, what the hell is he saying? And I would just make up the lyrics because the LP I had back in the day didn't have a lyric sheet and you didn't have the internet to look things up in. But great quirky song. Firth the Fifth has probably got Hackett's greatest guitar solo of all time.
Yep.
I mean, it's not even just one of Hackett's great guitar solos. It's one of the great guitar solos in rock history. It's just absolutely amazing. I just saw Steve Hackett like a month ago and just floored me. I saw him play it again. The Battle of Epping Forest is so cool. Cinema Show is just lovely. Isle of Plenty. I mean, the whole album is really good. Again, it's not quite as dense and serious as Foxtrot and Nursery Crime. It's a little more lighthearted. What's really weird is that this would have been the perfect sequel to this, but yet we had this in the middle, which this would have made more sense to come after Foxtrot. It's kind of weird how these albums kind of were released because I think that Trick of the Tail has more in common with this album than with The Lamb. So, but I know
that's true.
Doesn't really matter at all. But it's funny. The longer you think about this stuff and you listen to these albums back to back, Selling England is kind of also a lighthearted album, a little bit more brighter and a little bit more uplifting and not quite as heavy and dark and ominous as some of the other ones. But and tremendous production on this as well.
Yeah, it sounds great. Yeah. All righty. What's your number 2, Martin?
Okay, so my number 2 is Duke. I feel like this again just falls so incredibly logically between And Then There Were Three and Abacab. I find that the production's getting even more intriguing and interesting on here. The drum sound, there's a little treatment going on to the drum sound. It's loose, it's vibrant, it sounds like a band that's lively and alive. They recorded this at Polar Studios. It's the last of 4 with David Henschel producing. I love the sounds on it. Again, I could just listen to these albums just for the beautiful humanity and analogness of the sound. But like I say, they're adding a couple cool little things here. Love Behind the Lines, great opener, and then side 2 opener, great opener, turn it on again. I love this artwork. It's so fresh and different, right? It's just so interesting. It's like a clean palette sort of artwork. for them. But yeah, it's got good proggy stuff on it. Misunderstanding, I think, is a pretty catchy, good, 3-4 times sort of Styxy ballad. But at least it's a full band thing. I love the big octopus sort of beat on Man of Our Time. Cul-de-sac is cool. Yeah, I just it really does sound like it just sounds like a more realized version of And Then There Were Three, which I totally love as well. Obviously, it was in my list. So there you go, Duke.
To me, I think Duke was their last great keyboardy album, because I think Tony Banks plays some great piano and organ and synths on that album. Like it's really a very keyboard heavy album, but I think it really works as such. And I think Phil's drums are also magnificent on it.
Yeah.
What's amazing is these guys got on the radio with a song like Turn It On Again with a crazy time signature on it.
Yeah.
And that's top 5 Genesis, that song. I love that song for that reason. It's just so cool and weird and awesome. So my number 2, this was just mentioned, Selling England by the Pound, 1974. Another album with the classic lineup. All my picks up to this point, I've been a little bit patchy in that, there was some really strong material, but stuff that I wasn't crazy about. But this record is top to bottom. It's great. I mean, there's no weaker tracks. There's no real duds on this. It's a great record, top to bottom. Starting with the opener, you mentioned Dancing with the Moonlight King. They do this. I mean, they're playing a song and then they just go into this jam. And that jam is just unbelievable. World-class musicians just playing off each other. It's just so well done and just musical. I love it when they let loose and just, which they do on that track, which is amazing. The album sounds really, really good. You're talking about analog sounding. This is about as analog sounding as you can get. Everything sounds natural, and you can hear the air around the instruments. It's a beautiful recorded record. I mean, all the songs on here are good, but the standout for me is, as you mentioned, Firth of Fifth. Steve Hackett, the solo is incredible. The piano open is great, and then it gets into that majestic verse. It's heavy, it's cool, just make sure I'm not forgetting anything here. Peter singing on the More for me is just awesome. That one of my favorite of his vocal performances. The Battle of Epping, so good. The Cinema Show, just a top to bottom fantastic record, consistent. Even if you're not a fan of prog, okay, there's enough, again, melodic, interesting, catchy material to keep you entertained during even the longer tracks on this. I mean, this is the record for how did people who don't like prog. This would be the one you want to listen to.
Yeah.
This will get you in. Gateway, But great record, man. Absolutely love that. Love that record. All right, we're down to our number ones.
Yep. Did I do okay, Martin?
No.
Yeah, I mean, it can only be Foxtrot. I mean, that's
really wow. Okay.
It's always been Foxtrot.
Yeah,
it's always been Foxtrot. To me, this is one of I often cite Close to the Edge by Yes as the greatest prog album of all time. This is probably number 2 or number 3 for me. I mean, that ominous, haunting opening to Watch Where the Skies. I still, when I listen to it today, the chills, the hairs on the back of my neck go up. Timetable, Get 'Em Out by Friday is so upbeat and quirky and complex and rocking. And you got the Can Utility and the Coastliners is so much fun. Horizons is gorgeous. And then, of course, you got, Supper's Ready, which has all these parts. And it's just, it's amazing how like a band like Genesis and a band like Yes could write these epics that are basically comprised of all these little songs and bits that they just kind of put together and boom, perfection, right? That whole, dun 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 dun, that synth solo, that organ solo from Tony, just so good, and Peter's vocals so good. and Phil does a spectacular job on the Supper's Ready live album on it. But yeah, just I mean, Seconds Out live album. Supper's Ready. I got Supper's Ready in the brain. But yeah, I love the album, love the artwork. Again, more Paul Whitehead artwork, and yeah, it's my favorite Genesis of all time.
Yeah, I mean the arrangements, right? You know, the being able to go from one to another and kind of make it all smooth and kind of hang together. That in itself is an art form right there, you know.
And Hackett's guitar work on these albums is very unique because he's not like a big riffy guy.
No.
He does like all these little noises and all these little weird things. You know, he's doing these really early like hammer-ons, and he's taking the pick and, you know, going up and down. It's all this weird shit that like nobody was doing, but it's not like traditional like guitar work that you would hear in like, you know, bands of this era or even other prog bands. He wasn't just playing big riffs. He's doing like these, you know, all sorts of interesting tunings, and, you know, between the acoustic and electric, and even his solos are jagged and ragged and just amazing. That's why, like, when the fifth solo from the Selling England album is just so gorgeous, because he wasn't doing that sort of gorgeous guitar soloing on some of the earlier albums. It was definitely more mysterious and weird. And then he came out with that, and it's just like, wow, this guy can do stuff like that. It's like, hell yeah, he can.
Yeah, and you can hear him. He's not buried under a pile of keyboards.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I'll mention in my number one pick, but yeah. It's nice that you can hear the guy actually, they let him go, you know, and let him play. Like, it's guitar dominant for like a little bit, you know. Tony, take a break, you know, let's hear some Steve, you know. But anyways, all right, what do you got for number one, Martin?
All right. So I'm kidding, of course. I know you have the right answer, and Lamb is the right answer, and Selling England by the Pound is the right answer, right? And you know, I feel really bad not having a lot of Peter Gabriel in here, but I got to tell you, Peter Gabriel 3 I like better than every Genesis album. Security I might like better than every Genesis album. I mean, I'd put So pretty high up there, and I'd even put both the other Peter. So I worship the guy, right? But he's not in here at my number one. It's Abacab. It was always going to be Abacab. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. The first side of this, I just love everything to death on this. Abacab, no reply at all. Even Me and Sarah Jane is just a gorgeously put together mellow one. I love Keep It Dark. Everybody loves Keep It Dark. Everybody doesn't love Whodunit, though. A lot of Genesis fans hate Whodunit, and I love Whodunit. It's my favorite thing on side 2. I love Dodo Lurker. I even like Man on the Corner, which sounds like a Foreigner song, you know, like a moody little quiet Foreigner song. So I like thinking of it that way rather than a Phil Collins solo song type thing. But I think Another Record's amazing. But what I love the most about this record is the drum sound. It's my favorite drum sound of all time. It's one of my favorite productions of all time. And you know, I'm saying this and kind of embarrassed having this high, but like I say, I went and looked at a few YouTube rankings of shows, and this either comes up really high or really low. Like, nobody really has any sort of middle ground opinion of this. It's yeah. I mean, you basically pick your spots with this band, don't you? What you like and what you don't like. But I just think it's just an incredibly user-friendly version of synthesizer and drums, essentially, is what this sounds like to me, and vocals. Just beautifully put together songs, tough songs, a lot of variety. Hugh Padgham, you know, on the production, but it's self-produced, right? So yeah, it's just always been one of my favorite, you know, well, we did a show, right, Pete, favorite prog albums, and you know, it's even travesty calling it a prog album, right? But yeah, I love it to death. It was always going to be my number one. There you go, Abacab. No apologies.
No apologies required. Well, after all that, I guess this is going to be pretty anticlimactic, but that's my number one right there.
Yeah.
And
well, that's the right answer too, right?
That's the right answer too. You know, and the thing is, I don't love all of it, but what I love is so damn good. And this has got to be their heaviest record. This has got to be their heaviest record. You know, the classic line. I'm just, you know, sorry, I got notes here because my memory's crappy. You know, opening track right off the bat, got a lot of radio play. It's a fantastic song. You know, there's so many highlights. you know, the obvious, the opening track, you know, Fly on a Windshield. I mean, you know, Broadway Melody is 74. And now, you know, you got the little 2-minute little snippets in there because again, it's a concept record and they're trying to repel the story. But those 2-minute little snippets are really cool. Some of them, right? But for me, the absolute, you know, just like the Motherlode song, the one that absolutely crushes me on this is Back in New York City. That is just what a crazy heavy keyboard riff. It's heavy, it's relentless. It's oh man, like as soon as I heard that, like, oh my god, this is the coolest shit. Just love it, you know. And then you got Counting on Out Time, very poppy and cool. Love that heavy riff that comes in after the verse. Carpet Crawlers is fantastic. Lily White Lily. That is a proper rock song with a heavy guitar. Finally, you know. But there's just so many good moments in there kind of interspersed. It does for me at the end, it kind of does trail off a little bit, but I mean that first, I guess in album language would be like the first maybe album and a half is just absolutely chock full of incredible heavy tunes, catchy as hell, very dark, you know.
Yeah,
But
really dark.
yeah, but man, there's just so many good moments on that record that even though, like for me, Selling England by the Pound, I mean, it's only a you know you're comparing a double album to a single album. It's a little more consistent song wise, but the moments on this just absolutely are devastating. And Back in New York City is just that that blew my mind. Love that song, love it.
And Carpet Crawlers is just
Oh
you
yeah, I mean
get out.
yeah, like
so
you know, again, this is a band for people who don't like prog because there's so many great riffs, super melodies. It's hooky. It's I mean, you can listen to a 10-minute song because it's hooky. It's interesting. It's you know, the arrangements, the musicianship, the creativity, it's just, you know, amazing. Amazing. And like I said at the start, for me it was all about Duke. Duke didn't even make my top 5. Right? It
yeah.
didn't even make my top 5. The early stuff, I mean, I don't think I have no, I don't have one record beyond 1978 on here. It's like this is the best stuff right there for me anyway, my personal opinion. But there you go, surprising. Alrighty. So let's go around. Pete, anything you want to mention? Anything coming up on SOT?
Well, I talked to one of the guys from Nick DeSalvo from the band Elder early this morning. So that went up on the channel today. So for all you Elder fans, go check that out. I'm talking to vocalist Ronnie Romero on Friday, and he's got a new solo album out where he's doing more metal covers. And of course, Ronnie Romero sings for Michael Schenker. I think he's going to be on the new Richie Faulkner band album. Richie Faulkner's got some new group he's put together, so he's on that. I mean, Ronnie is just everywhere. So I'm talking to him on Friday. Martin and I are coming up with another cool show. Martin and I actually have 2 really fun shows planned for the next 2 weeks. So this Friday, we're going to be talking about like music buying stories and experiences of us when we've actually stories that we can tell of us buying albums when we were younger and more recent years, whatever, albums, CDs, whatever it might be, but specific to like very, you know, certain instances. And then we've got a really fun, Martin, I'm so looking forward to this show. We've got a fun rant for next Friday where we're going to put on our grumpy curmudgeon hats and we're going to talk about what we really can't stand about going to rock concerts or music concerts these days. So that's kind of what's coming up over the next week or so, amongst a lot of other things.
Yeah, I need a seat. I need a seat and I need to be able to see. Those are the 2 things for me. I'm not standing up for an hour and a half. I can't do that anymore. And I need to see the band.
We will discuss that and a lot more.
Yeah. Those are the 2 big ones for me. Give me a chair and let me see the band. All right. What do you got, Martin? What's coming up?
Well, I just want to say one more thing about Genesis. That's this just sort of coming to me, right? So with Phil, you almost think what you did later was so sort of stupid and embarrassing. And you think, boy, Phil used to be really cool, right? With Peter, you almost, this is a little harsh because I love that early Genesis stuff too. But with Peter, you almost think you became way cooler than you used to be. And so you can look at the old Peter stuff and say, that isn't really what you were. You sound like you were young and like you weren't sure what you're going to do. And, you wanted to do this fancy pants stuff. But then like the blinding brilliance of his solo catalog, like blinds you to like, you almost feel like I say, you almost feel like it makes the earlier stuff a little less valid when you see how cool he became. Kind of thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's kind of a weird thought that's just sort of popping around in my head, right?
Yeah, I mean,
you got any?
Well, I mean, there's a couple ways to look at it, right? I think that the early Genesis days for Peter was his kind of like artsy fartsy days, right? He was trying to figure out what the hell he wants to do. He was into wearing costumes and masks and being the real British singer up there, kind of portraying characters and whatnot. And he like completely moved away from that, and he became like a really good songwriter who could write music that was accessible to the masses. Because let's be frank, the early Genesis albums that he was on, those were never going to be million selling albums. You're never, that stuff is never going to appeal to like the common person. I mean, Hack, you mentioned earlier about, some of the latter stuff, mid to late 70s, you could introduce a non-prog fan to, and they could be like, oh, this is pretty good. But like, Foxtrot, Lamb, Nursery Crime, Trespass, those are hard sells for someone who's into more like mainstream rock music. Whereas, Duke, and then there were 3 even selling England by the pound. Yeah, you could probably push them on someone who's not into this sort of thing. So I think Peter he kind of grew out of it. He grew up, and Phil too. I mean, I think Phil, deep down inside, I know early on, he always talked about how he was a big jazz fan. That's why he put together Brand X. He played jazz before he joined up in Genesis. But I think Phil also had a deep love for like R&B and soul music.
R&B, yeah.
And that's the way he took his solo career. So, of course, the music and that sold gazillions, right? So, of course, the guys in Genesis, say what you want about Mike Rutherford or Tony Banks, but I'm sure they wanted to be successful too and make lots of money. So they were like, all right, we can go in this kind of direction, and we're fine with it. And they never looked back.
But speaking of what Martin was saying with the cool factor, I mean, Peter Gabriel was making obviously accessible music, but it was always very interesting, accessible music.
Yeah.
He always had that arty touch to everything he did. His instrumentation, his arrangements, it was catchy, but it was really like almost cerebral from a musical point of view. Do you know what I mean? There was a lot going on, but it's still, he basically was able to get the best of both worlds, the artsy, the musicianship and all that stuff, but still make it digestible to the general public, right? Which,
yeah, and I think Peter wanted to appeal to music listeners of all ages, all nationalities across the globe. I mean, that they call some of his music world music.
Yeah.
And I think, and he had a terrific band. I mean, look at that lineup of musicians, right? So I think his music was still kind of artsy, but very accessible.
Yes.
Whereas, Phil's solo stuff was great for like, U.S. pop and R&B listeners, right? But beyond that, maybe not so much. I don't know.
Let me ask you this: so I think the best lyrics is the Peter catalog, but the second best lyrics, and I think the worst lyrics, I think we could agree, are later Genesis and then the Phil solo catalog. But what would you say are the second best lyrics? Do you think it's the early Phil era, like the 76 through to 78, or would you say it's the Peter Gabriel era? I don't know.
Well, I think the lyrics to Trick, Wind and Wuthering, and then there were 3 in Duke are pretty damn good.
I know, me too.
the lyrics to the early albums are kind of vague and a little naive, and they're cool if you like fantasy stuff and mythology and all that sort of thing. But again, is that going to appeal to more than just this prog audience? Maybe not.
Mhm.
Like, it's just, I don't know. I think probably the most mature lyrics they did that were at least interesting, to more than just a nerdy prog guy like me, were that latter period of the 70s up to like maybe 80, 81.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, folks, thanks for watching and supporting. If you'd like to support the channel, I have links below. There's Guitar Hack merch. I saw Martin earlier with a Guitar Hack mug.
Yeah.
There's hats, there's
Yeah, right here.
t-shirts, there's all that good stuff. That's all below. There's also PayPal down there. But more importantly, if you're new to the channel, please consider liking and subscribing. And I have myself some original music, and I have a song up right now, right on my YouTube page, MindCloud. Check it out. Real proud of that one. I think that one turned out really good. It's not prog. There's only one time signature, but we do speed up and slow down if that helps. So, there you go. All right. So thanks again, everybody, for watching. Guys, hang tight. And oh god. Okay, the show. All right. Hang tight, guys. Okay, good night, everybody. Have a good one. Cheers.